From 1981 to 2015, R. James Jim Ertl has served as the Executive Secretary of the Minnesota FFA Association. Jim's career spans 4 decades. Jim's impact on agricultural education and his commitment to assisting chapter FFA advisors, working with FFA members, state officers, and his passion for the Minnesota State Fair are hallmarks of his career. When you ask people to share their impression of Jim Ertl, a smile always comes to their face, and they begin to tell stories of how this man made a positive impact on their life. Over his 35-year career, Jim Ertl has worked with 210 Minnesota State FFA officers and 280 regional presidents, nearly 500 Minnesota FFA leaders. And each year, the new officer team learned their leadership roles and responsibilities from Jim. It likely started with Jim grabbing their elbow and directing them to get involved in setting up for an event, presenting awards, talking with someone, or packing up at the conclusion of the event. Jim was nearly always the first person to arrive to set up each event and the last person to leave after the event concluded. When Jim Ertl arrived in 1981, Paul Day was the advisor of the Minnesota FFA Association. Mr. Day was a direct leader who left little doubt as to the proper procedures for any FFA leadership function or event. Paul wrote a letter to Jim upon his retirement in 1994 in which he stated, and I quote, "I gained the highest respect for your ambition, character, and integrity." Mr. Ertl and Mr. Day provided strong leadership for agricultural education and Minnesota FFA together for nearly 15 years. Their leadership during the 1980s helped lead ag education and Minnesota FFA through the challenges of the farm economic crisis. Jim Ertl's first passion is the Minnesota State Fair. In fact, Jim managed the FFA Children's Barnyard at the Minnesota State Fair prior to being named Executive Secretary. It was the opportunity to work with state staff and state officers during the state fair that led Paul Day to encourage Jim to pursue the position as Minnesota FFA Executive Secretary. If you want to see Jim Ertl in his element and see the enthusiasm and his passion for agriculture, spend some time at the CHS Miracle of Birth Center talking with him. His fair responsibilities start weeks before opening day and end long after the crowds have gone home. Bunnyland and the ducklings' first swim are a few of the little touches Jim brings to the Miracle of Birth Center. More importantly, during the fair, the Minnesota FFA Leadership Center and the Miracle of Birth Center become a place where reunions happen. Reunions with past state officers, FFA members, advisors, parents, and friends. It becomes a place to sit, share, and catch up on the past year's life events. If you are lucky, Jim's wife Jane has made some cookies, bars, or shared some salsa from their garden. The air conditioning in the building is an added bonus. From the horse that bit a fairgoer to the hundreds of births that take place each year, Jim manages the chaos of the state fair. There are rumors that Jim Ertl has a collection of every state fair Fleet Farm t-shirt. These t-shirts are a major part of Jim's day-to-day wardrobe. Jim Ertl has met more princesses representing agriculture, Miss Minnesotas, and Miss Americas in Minnesota than any other person on the fairgrounds. If you think about FFA leadership conferences, 35 years and more than 300 students each year, Jim Ertl has chaperoned and managed more than 10,000 Minnesota FFA members at state Green Hand and state leadership conferences during his career. The first camps were at Carefree Pines near McGregor and at Pilgrim Point near Alexandria. For the past 25 years, Deep Portage Conservation Reserve near Hackensack has been the summer conference home for Minnesota FFA. Starting with the Power Conference in June, State Green Hand Leadership Conference, and ending with 2 back-to-back state leadership conferences for chapter leadership in July, Jim's Jeep knows the back roads and the fastest route between Rosemont and Deep Portage. He has survived tornadoes, mosquitoes, power outages, and many trips to the emergency room at FFA leadership events. Jim becomes the camp pharmacist and helps manage those homesick green hands who are ready to go home after less than a day. The best part of the conference comes on the final morning, when these same kids who did not want to stay are not ready to say goodbye to their new friends. If you think that managing all those FFA members is a big task, remember that the state officers need a little direction and sometimes a little motivation during these leadership conferences too. Jim Ertl has been the common link between each Minnesota FFA chapter and the national FFA organization. His travels have taken him and our state officers to every corner of Minnesota. It is likely that he can find the high school in every community without stopping to ask for directions. With 35 years in agricultural education, a road trip with Jim Ertl is an oral history lesson. You will learn who the ag teachers were in a community, where state officers' homes and farms are found, the farms of our state stars, and the best off-the-main road diners in Minnesota. The main roads are for novices. Ertl knows every county road across the state. One of the highlights each year has been our annual Star Tour, where we visit each of the 8 region nominees for Star Farmer, Star Agribusiness, Placement, and Agri-Science. The trip usually ends up well over 1,000 miles and takes at least 4 days on the road. The opportunity to spend time on the farms and in the homes of these outstanding young individuals always reinforces the impact that FFA has had on these leaders. The trip provides an opportunity to check out some of the best out-of-the-way and off-the-beaten-path places in Minnesota. The trip happens in March, which has weather ranging from blizzard conditions, thunderstorms, and 80-degree days. The trip always includes lots of muddy yards and amazing farms. The Minnesota FFA Convention brings together nearly 4,000 FFA members, advisors, foundation sponsors, and alumni members. Planning starts before Christmas with each officer team, and as the days of convention count down, the number of projects, awards, buttons, programs, and details mount. As an observer at a convention, sitting in the crowd, you would never see all of the work that Jim Ertl and the state staff have done prior to the event. And that's the way Jim wants it. The stage belongs to the Minnesota FFA officers. The plaques and awards are all in place and at the ready. The table is set. The programs are printed, certificates stuffed, and the convention rolls on. More than 100,000 Minnesota FFA members have come to convention since Jim Ertl's career began. They have come in snowstorms, power outages, rain, and with temperatures in the 90s. And FFA members have sat on the lawn outside of the convention center since the first convention. Planning a convention for every chapter in our state has been a challenge. The career development events need to be first-rate. Our foundation sponsors need to be duly recognized. Our chapter members and advisors' expectations are set high, mainly due to the outstanding work of Jim Ertl and the state staff. In 1981, the executive secretary and the state advisor were the state staff for the Minnesota FFA Association and agricultural education programs in Minnesota. In addition to FFA Association duties, The executive secretary included serving as the executive director for the Minnesota Post-Secondary Agriculture Student Organization. The Minnesota FFA Foundation was a volunteer organization. The Minnesota FFA Alumni Association was just becoming established. Today, in 2015, the Minnesota FFA Association staff includes Jim Ertl, Executive Secretary, Levin Rada, Leadership Development Coordinator, and Joel Larson, State Advisor. Val Arsvold now leads the Minnesota FFA Foundation as the Executive Director. The Minnesota FFA alumni is now a vital member of the Ag Ed family. Over 4 decades, Jim Ertl has managed an association that has adapted and changed to meet the needs of our students, our FFA chapters and advisors, and all of our agriculture teachers. There have been tremendous highs with national FFA officers, national FFA stars, and national FFA career development events winners from Minnesota. There have been tough times, too, when we needed to support each other and the agricultural education family in Minnesota. Jim Ertl has provided leadership to Minnesota FFA over 4 decades. With his cell phone in hand, he has always been the foundation of this organization and the successes that have followed. He is a true friend who has sacrificed personal accolades for this FFA association. Thanks to Jane, John, and Jason Ertl for sharing Jim with Minnesota Agriculture Education and FFA. And thank you to Jim Ertl for the impact you have had on this state FFA association. Your passion for agriculture and for its people is seen through your enthusiasm and your smile. May your rewards be a retirement filled with the same adventure and passion that you have shown for more than 35 years.